Hello, everyone, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Better the Pond Pondcast, where we talk to amazing people doing incredible things that lead the charge of generosity. My name is Warren Berry, and I'm your host and the founder of Instinctive Solutions, where we believe that everyone is an odd duck, but that's what makes them awesome. Today, our guest is Mr. Edward Fitzgerald. Now, Edward is definitely from across the pond. He lives out in the UK. He's an international keynote speaker on sustained innovation. He's a film producer working with the likes of Brian Tracy and Jack Canfield, and now the new to be released movie documentary, Dreamer. He's a best-selling author, and he's a yachtsman who's raced around the world, in which he actually sustained an acquired brain injury. Now, it was through a doctor telling him that he had hit his threshold that moved him forward. So now he lives his life on the edge, has learned to trust his gut, and wants to transform the lives of 3 billion people. He fully believes that whatever your mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Welcome to the Better the Pondcast, Mr. Edward Fitzgerald. So, Edward, I really want to welcome you to the Better the Pond Pondcast. It is so great to have you here. And Edward, so you were once a gosling, and now here you are as a full-grown goose, and you're full of wisdom. And I want to know, Edward, like what's your backstory? What has got you from being a gosling to a full-grown goose, and to what's got you here today? So Edward, I want to know what's your backstory. Who are you? Tell us all about yourself. What's got you here today?
I'm just a run-of-the-mill gosling and goose, really, that's just had lots of opportunities thrown my way. So I guess the oddball part was the fact that I got not exactly shown the door at university, but I certainly got to leave a lot earlier than I should have done, primarily because my biggest love is yacht racing, and it was felt that I was spending too much time racing dinghies and boats and things like that, rather than actually being seen to be studying, even though I was still getting the grades. So I left and joined a little company called Motorola as an engineer.
I'm gonna back you up here a little bit there, Edward.
Yeah.
I want to know about you as a gosling. I want to know where did you come from? Give me some more backstory.
Okay. All right. Okay. Born in South London. My father was a builder and decorator, but spent a lot of time in the film industry, decorating, building sets for big sort of TV productions and films that were filmed at Pine Studios, which is just outside of London. My mum was a stay-at-home mum, and I've got a younger sister that's 18 months younger than myself, and we didn't have a meteoric view of just a normal childhood, really, and but very caring and nurturing parents. Gave me a lot of scope to do what I wanted to do. Whatever my decisions were, they enabled those to happen, both when I was studying and what have you. I did actually want to go into the Navy. I went to a naval college when I was truly a gosling. So along with everything that went with it. So even that was in central London, and we would do our nautical boating activities in an old disused, well, it wasn't disused at the time, it was still a working dockyard called Limehouse Basin, and that's where they've sort of built luxury apartments now with the Canary, with the financial centre that it's expanded to sort of Canary Wharf, that sort of east part of London.
What was your affinity to? I mean, you're talking about being in the Navy, and what was the draw?
Good question. My father was in the parachute regiment, so and hated the water. He was sick on troop ships. So, so it certainly wasn't from my father. I had an uncle that was in the Navy during the Second World War. So I'm not sure where it really came from, but there was just that, I've always had that draw to the water, and that's stayed with me all of my my life really. My mistress is the sea, regardless of what my wife might say. But I get I don't know, it's when I'm around water, and even if I'm working hard, I always find that I'm a much more rounded and more balanced and able to cope with things once I've been sailing.
So you literally better the pond.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I've sailed a lot of the oceans around the world, mainly racing. It's only now that my sons are growing up that I do sort of what would be termed as sort of leisure sailing. Most of it was racing yachts or dinghies and things.
Very interesting. So you went from having an affinity to the water, want to join the Navy, and then where did you go from there?
I was studying marine electronics and telecommunications, and there was still, right up until that point, just before my professional career started, I was still looking to go into the Navy. And then I looked at what the artificer pay was in the Royal Navy versus what I could do on land, and the land job paid more. And as it turns out, I've actually worked in about 80 different countries since then.
Right. So bring us up to speed. We talked a little while back, Edward, when I first got to know you, and I mean, I think you have an absolutely fascinating story. So, shall we bring you up to speed into your sailing days, and then where that's led you up until today? What's that story?
So throughout my professional career, I so the odd goose or the odd gosling, what's made me an odd duck, is that I started a consultancy practice when I was age 23, for consulting with big multinationals, having only done a few years in industry itself. So I guess that was the odd bit, was the fact that there was me, fresh-faced 23-year-old, advising large corporations on how to bring products and services to market in various markets around the world. And I haven't really looked back from that. And interspersed with my traveling with work, I've always, as I said just a moment ago, work hard, play hard. I've always tried to involve the sailing aspects of it. Even when I was based in the south of France, I found that the sailing wasn't very good, so I'd fly back at the weekend to go racing, and I'd be back at the client's site on the Monday morning. And about 9 years ago, yes, it would be 9 years ago, I was just another race in a force 7 winds, which is about 35 miles an hour. I got hit on the forehead with a stainless steel ring about the thickness of my thumb. And because of my competitive nature, apparently, according to the neurologist, I continued racing. We were leading our class at the time in this race that races around at one of the islands that we have off the south of the UK. And then I wasn't completely diagnosed at the time, but the issues that I had was I'd lost connections to all my learned memory. My speech was slurred and laboured, and I was literally wandering from one room to another, couldn't hold a thought in my head, which is rather concerning when you're a consultant and you're advising large corporations. If you can't remember anything, then you're not much value. So the businesses that I built up over that period of 20 plus years, unfortunately, sort of crumbled and went to the wayside and closed down because I wasn't able to run them. I had former directors that took advantage of the situation. So it was quite a low point in my sort of professional career and what have you. Now, and I guess it took me.
Edward, do you remember the moment? Do you remember the when it all happened? You still have that memory of what?
I do, which is kind of bizarre, really. But I do, because I was still conscious. It didn't knock me out completely. Initially, I thought because the tail end. I don't know if anyone's familiar with sailing. Was the sail that goes at the front is called the jib, and it's because we're in full 7 winds. It's quite a really heavy canvas sail and quite a large ring on the end of the sail, on the corner of the sail, and you have ropes tied to it. So it was the tail end of those ropes that hit me. So the the metal hit me on the forehead and the ropes hit me across the cheek. And initially I thought I'd split my cheek open. That's just how, and that was where the most of the pain was. And but I can still visualize it now. It was just appeared to be historical events that I'd lost. It was mainly learned memories. So, I still recognize family and friends. That was the embarrassing thing, actually, was I'd be walking down the street and I'd smile at somebody thinking I knew them, but couldn't think where from. And the problem is, if you smile, even if you smile at a stranger, they smile back at you. And I was none the wiser to know whether, like, is he just being weird and not saying hello to us? Because outwardly, I didn't look any different.
So that must have been quite something for you to go from, being a 23-year-old and you're creating a consultancy business with major corporations, which is a huge endeavor in and of itself, to all of a sudden on a dime, your life turns. Just, it switches in an instant.
Yeah, obviously I was 40, what have I been then, 43 or something. So it was quite a way through my career. I was running projects remotely in New Zealand at the time, and it was the realization that I opened the laptop trying to work, and it wasn't. I think the profound thing for myself was, it wasn't that the login was asking me for a username and password, and it was like, oh, I've forgotten it. It was just no realization that there should have even been a password or anything. And it was, God knows what I would have done if I actually got into it. I probably wouldn't even been able to navigate my way around, Word or some of the email programs or whatever it was. And the problem was that, and I still do now, I've relearned how to do it, was I would use a different unique password that was roughly 18 characters. And I would memorize them. So I always had a good memory for numbers and characters and what have you. And so it was that kind of the little things, the realization that, oh God, there's just nothing. I don't even know that it should have been asking me for a password. Just bizarre little things like that.
Yeah,
let alone the big stuff.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating that the big things and names and whatnot that you had learned over time that you couldn't remember, but yet it was some of the smaller numbers and things that you could. Isn't that fascinating what our brain does?
Yeah.
So where did you go from there, Edward? Obviously now your life has turned. You can't remember things. Now, where did you bring us up to speed from that point?
I'm not sure if, so when people say about having a brain injury, quite often they don't understand that what's coupled with that is quite a lot of other issues that then, so depression and, I at the time I was having severe headaches. I had two sons at the time, third one's come along since, and they were young and screaming, so I was left with hypersensitive hearing, which I still have now. So along with the intense headaches, it just become unbearable, apart from the total exhaustion. And as I said, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, but it's not a constant, over about 18 months or 2 years, that there's the highs and the lows of being recovered and then depressed again. I had, one of the things that I realized was that I wasn't able to articulate to the neurologist and the supporting staff the problems that I was having. So they were making assumptions. And especially obviously the frontal lobe is the executive functioning, and a lot of the things like I had hypersensitive taste and smell as well as hearing, and they were like, well, those aren't related to that part of the brain that's been injured, so I realized that I couldn't actually read. Well, I could recognize words, and in order for me to articulate, or this was my rationale of it at the time, even though I couldn't really rationalize things, was I needed to understand, something inside me said I needed to understand how the brain worked so that I could then explain it better, because I was always struggling for the words. And so I just learnt to read the leaflets that they give out for all the different brain injuries or injuries to different parts of the brain. And that's how I started to learn to read again. So the words meant something. Well, the words on themselves I could read, but I put them in a sentence, it didn't make any sense. And certainly if I'd spend several hours just reading one side of paper, one sheet, I couldn't retain the knowledge. But over a period of months, I realized that I was reading, and it became a little bit more fluent, and I was able to retain some of the information. It was shortly after that, probably 3 or 4 months after that I'd done that I was told that I was expressing how frustrated I was, and was sat there with the neurologist and the counsellor, and the counsellor turned around and said, well, look, you're trying to be nice to me, said, well, look, you're going through a period of bereavement. The neurologist said, you've reached this plateau, and you're mourning the loss of your capabilities and functions. You're not going to be able to work internationally like you were before. And, but something, apart from anger, just something deep inside me said, I don't believe this. And it wasn't until after that fateful meeting that I realized, that I started to think, oh, hang on a minute, I've learned to read again, and I am remembering everything that I read. So hang on, my memory's not completely, gone completely. And so I didn't have any reference point. There wasn't anything that people would recount tales of people that have had spinal injuries and they've learned to walk again, and the spinal cords reconnected, but nothing with relation to the brain. So I didn't have any social reference to say, well, okay, that person's got better, or that's had a similar accident to myself. And
how did that feel, Edward? I mean, when you mentioned that that there were the people that you're working with you, and I'm sure well intentioned, but they were making assumptions on what what you were capable of or not capable of. You were having a hard time trying to articulate that, and then to the point where saying, well, I'm sorry, Edward, but you've plateaued, like you're not going to get any farther. And I mean, how did you feel about that? What did that feel inside?
Initially it was anger. And then there was just something inside me. I can't call it my subconscious, whether there's as many neurons in your gut as there are in your head, so whether there was some something else within me that said, I don't believe this is just, my intuition was telling me that this didn't fit. But I could, obviously, part of the brain that I couldn't make any sense of that. So I just started doing the opposite. So I didn't have any reference or starting point. So the first realization was that, hang on a minute, you're telling me I've plateaued, and yet in the last 3 months I've learned to read again, and I'm retaining the information. So that's new information, but I've just lost access to everything else historically. So I just thought, okay, well, I don't believe them. And I just started, so I had the list of all the things that the neurologist had told me not to do. Don't stress your brain, don't do this, don't do that. Even the very first project I took was either working with an existing client overseas, or to stay local and work with a company that was probably the most stressful I could ever think was the most stressful company I've ever worked with. And I thought, no, I'm going to do the opposite. So I started exercising my brain. I started to learn new things, just quizzes and just anything to exercise the brain. I just had this complete and utter belief that the brain is such an amazing organ that we're still learning. And a lot of the medicine that's practiced at the moment, no disrespect, is based upon 20th century knowledge of the brain, not the advancements that we have now. And over a period of time, I couldn't tell, one of the problems I still have is working out timelines for things historically. I probably wasn't very observant or very good with that anyway, but I'd have to try and work out, okay, where was I when this happened, to work out a particular date. Mm-hmm. So I guess probably over the next year and a bit, I would have just memories, schoolboy French grammar that I hadn't, I'd forgotten, would come back, and then something else had just come back, from left field, right field, all sorts of, and it was just like, oh, where did that come from? These just snippets of memories, and that gradually built up to the point where I'm actually starting to learn new things. I mean, the weirdest thing was the first project, first client I had to financially I had to do something, work with after the head injury. I was doing things that I'd been, that professionally I'd been doing 20 years earlier, and I could do in my sleep. But I was doing them I was making decisions based upon gut feel. That wasn't right engineering wise, but I couldn't say categorically, well, you can't do it like this because of X, Y, and Z. I just didn't have the X, Y, and Z knowledge, that something instinctively said, no, you've got to do it this way, which is the other bizarre thing of how, obviously how I was able to know instinctively that was right or wrong.
But interesting that the lever that you had was for somebody to tell you that you couldn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. That
and
was
I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah. And the fact is that you trusted your gut, you trusted your instincts. That piece inside of you that said that was talking to you and said, here, go this way, right? It was leading you, which I think is really fascinating. And also I think that you're walking proof of neuroplasticity of the brain.
Yeah. Absolutely. I wasn't even aware of neuroplasticity until about 3-4 years ago, when I was doing some research, because someone had asked me to write my story to co-author a book, and then I started to actually work out, okay, what did I do? Because I hadn't written down all the things and the steps that I did, so I had to reevaluate those. And that was when I came across the fact that there was a science now that recognizes this repairing of neural paths and what have you.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. So bring me up. Looking at some when we had talked before, looking at materials. You've gone into film producing. You've written a book. You're an international keynote speaker. So how did that all come into play, Edward?
Bizarre, really. It was rather bizarre. Part of the healing process, I was reintroduced to meditation during the recovery, and it was during one of my many meditations that what I wanted to do, and I said, I'm going to crazily, they're going to make a film of my book. I'm going to be on stage as an equal with Jack Canfield and Brian Tracy, and having never worked with these guys before. And bizarrely, the speaking thing, I'd always spoken at conferences, right, and because that was as an expert speaker in certain subject matter, and I'd registered prior to my head injury with a couple of agencies in the US and never had any bookings. And about 4 months after that I had this meditation and manifested, I got a phone call from an agency saying they were looking for a keynote speaker to talk on international trade. And I was like, okay, I know I said I wanted to get back into this, but my initial reaction was zero, because that's the other thing with the head injury, was zero confidence. So it's one thing wanting something, it's another matter trying to do it. And it was at the United Nations, and I said, I just made some excuse and said I wasn't available, primarily because I didn't feel confident enough to be able to go back to that, certainly to that level of speaking. And about a week later, the agency had said, well, I know we spoke to you about a week ago, but one of our other people's that, one of the other experts that we represent is a guy called Brian Tracy. And Brian Tracy was one of my sort of professional development reading material prior to the head injury and subsequent. And so I entertained the conversation purely because of the name. And I'm like, okay, not thinking that I would follow it through with anything. And that was where they said, well, look, I said, well, what's the subject matter? They said, oh, it's called the Success Blueprint. And I went, okay, look, and I was talking to one of the associate editors, and I said, look, I have to be honest with you. Yes, I was successful before my head injury, but the last few years I've been recovering, and I've sort of been having to build back up from almost being bankrupt, and I said it was so. I shared my little story with him as my recovery, and the guy said, "Oh my God, well that's your success story." And I went, "Well, I thought," and that was the perception. I thought I had in mind that it was something else business related. Or he went, "No, no, no. The subject of success takes different forms," and so that's how I ended up co-authoring a bestseller with Brian Tracy. But obviously, it was bestseller because his name was on it, not mine.
But I that's very fascinating, because I wanted to go back to what you said, that when you started meditation because of your brain injury. From there, you put out the intention that you were going to work with Brian Tracy,
Yeah.
and out of that, you started working with Brian Tracy.
Yeah. And then shortly after that, I was contacted again by his office saying they're going to make a film documentary of his life story, and we want to involve a number of his people that he's worked with over the years. So his 40-50 year career, and miraculously, so I joined the production team as a co-producer. And having originally turned it down because my third son was due the same month as filming, as the principal filming, and as it turned out, my son was 4 weeks early. So literally on the flight back from San Diego, my wife went into labour. But yeah, so there's all sorts of things. So that's part of what I tried to transfer from the before the hand injury and afterwards, my big reset, as I call it, is just opportunities present themselves, and you just have to say yes to them, because you don't know where that might lead to.
So from everything that you've learned, Edward, what do you think the biggest takeaway was? If you were to talk to our listeners and say, if I was to give you one piece of wisdom from the things that you've learned, being the wise goose that you are, what would that be?
To trust your instincts. Every time I've gone against, I realized that my superpower is my intuition, and that's just part of my journey since that I realized. And prior to the head injury, I would have said it was just serendipity, and things presented themselves because of fate or whatever it might have been. But it was because I trusted my intuition, and whenever I didn't trust my intuition, business wise or whatever it was, it didn't work out. That whenever I went against my intuition, things didn't pan out the way they should have done. The second point would be to always ensure that the quality of your questions are the best that they can be, because those will determine the quality of the answers that you get. So even if you're meditating and putting things out into as a part of an intention, be careful what you ask for.
You just might get it. Yeah, I've been saying is, be clear with your intentions. So
Yeah, absolutely.
saying something like, well, I want more money. Well, you could get a penny. A penny is more money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you could be, clear and concise. So that's fascinating. I just want to ask you, Edward, from your perspective, when you say we can call it fate, we can call it serendipity, we can call it divine intervention, we can call it the universe. There's so many labels that we can give this. What's your take on that? What if you were to choose a word that would describe for you what it is? What word would you choose?
Serendipity. It was. What's meant to be will be. If you go off course slightly, you'll be nudged back in the right direction. Of course, you can always be going against your intuition and sailing the wrong way for forever, for the rest of your life, and then wonder why life's dealt you a bum hand. But sometimes you just have to go with the flow. Just play with the cards you're dealt and see what happens.
I mean, I listened to Tony Robbins, and I mean, one of the things that I really like what he says is that life happens for you, not to you, and I fully believe that, and I think does that kind of sum up what you were trying to say?
Yes, yeah, especially with the head injury. I think we were talking previously about obviously we're experiencing global pandemics and an unprecedented time of people being in lockdown and a lot of stresses and strains from having freedom of movement. And I feel so fortunate that I had that head injury, even though I had several years of utter pain, heartache, both financially, emotionally, mentally, stressful. Um, the things that I learnt through that period have set me in good stead for where I am now. So the things, the techniques I've learned, the being, knowing that I should trust myself and trust my own decisions. That part of that is actually, if you're a control freak, it's like I don't want to release any control. It's about releasing and being happy that the right things are going to happen.
Isn't that interesting, Edward, that you're grateful for a head injury?
I know I probably wouldn't have been saying that, well, I certainly wasn't saying it, even 3 years after the head injury and 4 years after. It's one of the things that I did do was I didn't know who I was, what made me successful, what made me tick. I had to reevaluate my life. I went through various exercises for myself, going through identifying what my core values were, and that ultimately led me to realize that I was living my life incongruent, not in congruence with those core values. So there's things that I was doing. I was making, taking startups from Silicon Valley and helping them expand globally and be a success. And they're now $2 billion plus turnover organizations. And I realized that actually, I think I worked it out. There's over 4,500 products that and services that I'd helped launch globally in around 80 countries, and less than 5 of those innovations actually had a positive, meaningful impact on the lives of anyone, of humanity or the population. And there was a couple of medical products in there, but very, very, very few. And so I realized that my life's path isn't really that at all. And I guess that's sort of really I've worked through getting the clarity of what my purpose is and what it is, what skills that I have inherently and what I'm good at to make the difference, to work out, okay, how can I follow my purpose, or how can I embody that to the best of my abilities. And so I realized that
I'm gonna cut you off there, and you know what? Because it's a great segue,
yeah,
right? And so I believe that we're all odd ducks. I believe that we're all misfits. Um, and tell me about a time when you were the odd duck, and where you were different. But what did you do to stand out? And you let in earlier said what your superpower. So I want to know what your superpower. I want to know, Edward, what makes you awesome. This isn't bragging.
no,
This is a celebration of who you are. So I look at it as it's your inner goose coming out to play. So
yeah.
Edward, what made you the odd duck?
I was just being me. I don't think I realized I was odd. I didn't. I wasn't. I didn't want to fit inside the cookie cutter mold. I didn't ever feel when I was growing up that I had to be part of the gang or whatever to fit in. I was quite a sensitive young man, and I guess I was always happy to keep myself to myself if I didn't feel that that those people didn't align with my views or the way that I looked at the world. So if that makes me an odd duck, then perhaps, you know, not following the flock, then yes, I guess that would make it right. But any individual things, like, oh gosh, I don't know. Very creative, imaginative mind. Again, none of these qualities are unique to me. These are, you know, there are probably tens of thousands of your listeners that would say, okay, yeah, I'm very creative. I've, you know, a very good, vivid imagination. I've got a good sense of injustice. Again, these are, you know, some of my core values. And I guess those individually, when put together, makes me that odd duck.
But I think, you know, honestly, Edward, that I believe that everyone is equally creative. Every
Mm-hmm.
human being is equally creative.
Yeah.
I think that what makes it special is that it's, you know, each individual's spin on that, you know, that makes us the odd duck. And you know, and you never wanted to fit in as a kid. You wanted to do things differently, you know, and that separated you from the flock, which is fine. And you know, and it's really, you know, and you looked again of you know, you have a brain injury, which then set you on a different path. And I think that's really quite exceptional. And how you're putting that into play, all right, that's what makes you awesome. And so, and you led earlier into your superpower. You said your superpower is trusting your instincts. I've yet to hear anyone say that, and that is absolutely, you're talking my language there, Edward. Tell me a little bit more.
I fought it occasionally, and that's why, you know, it's when I fought it, things didn't work the way they should. I should have just, you know, realized afterwards with hindsight, I should have trusted my intuition.
So for my listeners, right, what does that look like? How does, you know, can you put that into words of trusting your instincts and to listen? You know, what happens when you don't listen to, and what does that feel like when you do? Can you put that into words, because you've experienced that firsthand? And I think a lot of people, as we get into adulthood, we forget that part of us. We forget to trust ourselves, and then, you know, and then the book says, or Google says, or, you know, my boss says, or right, I think we honestly lose that as we age.
Yeah, I've never lost it. That's probably what makes me the odd duck. And more so now, I've realised that I need to relinquish control and be even more open and accepting of trusting my intuition. And I think I did it instinctively before the head injury, and then obviously I've had this sort of unsettling period, and I'm only now back at the stage where I probably was before the head injury in terms of total trust. And if I can describe it, if people can recognize it, you know, something is said to you and you get that little butterfly moment, or you get that unsettling in the stomach, and you think, oh, okay, I'm not quite sure. Okay, yes, I'll do it, even though you just feel unsettled. So you just got to listen to your body, really. I mean, for me, it's my gut, and that's where, you know, I feel unsettled if something doesn't sit right with me. So it doesn't resonate, or, you know, just there's a clanging bell, and you go, ooh, that doesn't. So sometimes it's subtle, and sometimes it's whoa, no, I'm not going there. I'm not going to make that decision. But sometimes it's a lot more subtle than that. So I think it's just about people listening to their own bodies, and knowing what harmony feels like, and when you feel uneasy.
You know, it's interesting when we talk about instinct, that, you know, we never point to our head. We always talk about our gut, or we talk about our heart.
Yeah, it's a whole body thing. You know, we are more connected than we would like to believe, I think, in terms of or the medical profession would like you to believe. I mean, obviously there are certain medical, you know, philosophies and theories that would say, oh yes, of course everything's connected. You know, sort of Eastern medicine is obviously, it's one of those. about that energy flow. And I think it's just that sense of when you feel disrupted, in whichever part of the body it is, that's your body, that's your intuition, that's your subconscious telling you that actually you're making a decision that's against what your core values are. So when I'm mentoring, I try to make my mentees very, very conscious of what their core values are, so that they're consciously aware of them, so that they know that when they get that funny feeling, that's that internal decision making process that's saying no, these don't align. Or
yeah, so it's a funny thing, because we tend to want to listen to our heads, but really we should be listening to our bodies.
Yeah, because I think that's always the rational part of the brain that tries to kick in to analyze. And I think rightly or wrongly, I think we're conditioned as a species over modern times to pay more attention to the rational side than to perhaps the subconscious, irrational aspects of the human psyche.
So we need to listen to our odd duck, right? Yeah, excellent. So Edward, can you tell me about a time when someone did something for you that made an impact on your life?
I think just growing up, it was from my parents, really. It wasn't one instance, it wasn't one thing. It was just that environment that they created to enable me to, I guess, a nurturing environment that just enabled me to flourish and be confident in myself to make decisions for myself. And I think that is what set me up to be that odd duck, to be confident enough in myself that I don't have to fit in. And I think that's probably the most that's the bedrock of Edward. That's
So can you go back to a specific time, Edward, whether it be your mom or your dad, that that defining moment when you got it, that shifted things, that had left that mark on you?
I'm not even sure how old I was, but I've got a vision of myself sat on the edge of a cliff with my dad, and my mum freaking out, and my dad saying it's fine. My mum's obviously seeing the crumbling cliff edge and wanted to protect. My dad saying it's fine, we're okay, because obviously he was in the parachute regiment, so heights weren't a thing for him. Just being on the sea was his uncomfortable element. And I guess that was probably looking back, even though I probably didn't realize it at the time, that was just that the trust, I guess, the bond and the trust. And my dad, and most other parents might go, I'm so reckless, but just having that trust, that knowing that I could experience these things with him being there and being there to support me. Probably rather extreme, but.
Well, but is it? Your dad took you to the edge and let you know that it was okay. That's a valuable life lesson right there.
Yeah.
I've always said, if you're not living life on the edge, you're taking up too much space.
Yeah.
So Edward, what are you doing right now to better the pond? What are you doing to give back? What are you doing to make the pond better? That's my first question. And my second question to that is, why are you doing it, and why does it matter?
Okay. Everything that I've been doing, so you mentioned about the book and the film production pieces and everything else, which is not obviously that's not my core element or expertise, but the reason that I've been doing those, so the current one before this pandemic sort of kicked in, we were in mid-production for a new movie called Dreamer, and it was about giving social reference to those people that perhaps have had big dreams that didn't fulfill on them, and just giving them the impetus to actually say, look, go ahead and you can be amazing and still achieve those big dreams. And part of the reason for me getting involved with these kinds of projects is to actually my purpose that I have at the moment, or that's come out of the clarity from the head injury and everything else, is to transform 3 billion lives in a meaningful.
Say that again.
To transform 3 billion. So I didn't say million. I said billion with a B. Lives in a positive and meaningful way. And when I set that goal, I didn't have a clue how I was going to achieve it. It came as a consequence of reading a report that an additional 3 billion people over the next 5 to 10 years would be accessing the internet. So that would take us pretty much up to the 8 billion population by 2025 or whatever it would be. And it just struck me as a humanity, a human conflict, in the respect that we have billions of people that still don't have access to clean water every single month around the world because of natural disasters or droughts or pollution and and things like that. So it was just driven from the fact that I will use my skills to make a difference, both to the planet, to people, and find ways to actually have a legacy. So it's that very much in the analogy of yourself with the pond. It's my vision was, if I can just influence one person to change their mindset on how they do their business or how they innovate products, to not use plastics, to use something else, or to not just create the next app that's going to sit in Apple iStore or whatever it might be, to actually say, okay, what could I use my skills for that would actually have a positive meaning impact on just the life of one other person? And it was very much that pebble in the pond, to see how far those ripples would influence someone else and someone else and someone else, to achieve that, at least 3 billion. Because I was asked that question by Jack Canfield. He said, why only 3 billion? Why not the whole planet? And I said, well, I'm happy to increase the number, but I think 3 billion, 3 billion lives will actually would actually tip the balance in terms of the environment and the impact that it would have to others. So that's I guess, and that's part of the reflection of why am I doing this. It was because I'm fed up with helping clients make billions of dollars. I don't want to be measured on, when I go out, I don't want, when I leave this world, I don't want to be measured on how many billions of dollars I've helped clients make. I want to be measured on the number of billions of lives I've helped change.
Wow. That's amazing. So how far, right now, presently, Edward, how far do you think you've come in that journey?
It's been it's like anything, building up a momentum. It's very interesting. The tagline that I created back I think it was almost 3 years ago, was to transform 3 billion lives one mind at a time. And I have been, everyone I touch, I've been transforming that, their mindset or their lives. And it's been interesting, where I've also been working with people that have either had brain injuries or strokes or whatever. They've all been told this same phrase. It's almost as though it's in the doctor's handbook that says you've reached a plateau, and you're not going to get any better. So if anything, that was the reason for writing my story in the book, was to transform one person's life, to actually say, have faith and trust that your brain's an amazing organ and you can get better.
So therefore, I'm going to challenge you. I bet you can't affect 8 billion lives. So Edward, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm with you. And if you see the map behind me, my goal is to have Goose here, make his way around the world and affect the entire pond. So I definitely share that with you. Is and one step at a time, one person at a time, one gesture at a time, one kind word at a time. That's all it takes. And what we are doing is throwing those ripples, throwing the pebble in the pond, and those ripples just keep going out. And I think that you never know the effect that you can have. Like something so simple, you don't know the other side of that. And that's the beauty of it.
You never know whether that person's having a bad day, and that you're just one kind gesture was the difference between them committing suicide or not. And having been at the very low point in my recovery, and I was saying about my clinical depression, at a very low point, I almost committed suicide. So I do empathize with that one kind gesture. But one of the things we were saying about projects, so part of me reevaluating is the projects that I work on, is that those projects that I work on, I evaluate to say, well, what's the maximum impact that I can achieve with that project, because my time's limited. So if I can only impact 10,000 lives with one project, I'll choose one that's has the potential to impact millions over those 10,000. So part of the sort of the progress has been to work with sort of a few individuals with some crazy innovations to impact the most lives possible. So,
but here's the funny thing: are they crazy?
They're crazy to other people. They're not to me. So that's my hook, as it were. Anyone that's called your dream crazy, come and speak to me, and then we'll see if we can be crazy about it together.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. So, so Edward, what does your future look like? And I want you to paint me a picture of your golden pond. What does the future look like? You were the all-knowing, you were the sage goose on the pond. You have your crystal ball, and you're looking forward. What does your golden pond look like?
A world where everyone is considerate, compassionate, has empathy for others, where the best is brought out and is encouraged, not just brought out, but encouraged, rather than, unfortunately during this current period, we're seeing people reverting to type of being horrible and nasty and selfish. We are obviously seeing a lot of people that are being very kind, compassionate, putting themselves before others. And I guess that sort of the utopia would be where our oceans aren't clogged with plastics and pollution of mercury and other things, and that we do have a clean environment, that we're happy to breathe the air, knowing that future generations aren't going to be grow up deformed or mutated because of some decision that some corporate made to introduce some chemical because it improved their productivity. And I think it's just about looking at the triple bottom line from a business perspective. So part of my drive at the moment is purpose, around purpose-led businesses, and I think that is the new epoch of the new world. People that are not just centered around making a profit all the time, and it's about actually having community and social respect for others.
Do you think that this situation that we've presently gone through with the pandemic has given us a different perspective, and possibly start to look now at that view of people over profits?
It's certainly started to. I'm certainly hearing those conversations a lot more than I was hearing before, and I think there's the one good thing that's come out of this is people have stopped their 9-to-5 jobs. They've had a break of environment. They're not continuously in this groundhog day of wake up, go back to work. They're able to actually sit still, think, see the blue skies, because we don't have the pollution levels that we've had. There are reports from around the world of the environment sort of improving, and I sincerely hope that this is the impetus that we needed as a as a race, as as humanity, to actually recognize, or for everyone individually to recognize, that we couldn't continue the way that we were going. It was untenable. We, that I certainly think from the research that's been done just prior to the pandemic, was showing that there was a conscious shift to purpose rather than profit. So people would buy and switch their purchasing habits towards purpose-led businesses rather than brands and businesses that didn't take, played lip service to the environment and to doing good rather than making money.
Right, absolutely. So, Edward Fitzgerald, I want to thank you ever so much. I want to thank you for being the odd duck. I want to thank you for your brain injury. I think that has been an incredible gift to society, because I think really, when you started to understand yourself and what was important, and you now are looking to help others because of that. And I think that's an incredible story. So Edward, where can people go to find you? And I also want to know, here's the bit of a plug. We want to plug the movie. We want to plug the book. Where do we go to find you, Edward?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on most social media outlets as Ed Fitzgerald UK. So you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. Not so active on Twitter, but certainly that some of the feeds get repeated on Twitter. Certainly and obviously I'll be announcing the trailer very soon for the movie called Dreamer. And yes, so just so perhaps the audience, your listeners, know, we've got Lisa Nichols involved, who's a big motivational, transformational speaker. Mm-hmm. We have Dean Kamen, who's a billionaire inventor who invented the Segway. It was one of his sideline inventions, amongst all the medical ones that he'd done. We've got Peter Diamandis, who was the chairman and founder of X Prize. We also have Anusha Ansari, who is the current CEO of X Prize. Mm-hmm. And she was the first female private astronaut to go into space. So yes, so we've got quite an eclectic, and there's a few others that we've that go into the movie to share their stories. So I'll if anybody wants to follow me on any of those social media platforms, then I'll obviously be promoting the movie through that. Yeah, and certainly there'll be a trailer out very soon.
Excellent, and I'll definitely push it out as well on my social feeds. So, all right, there we have it. We had Edward. I had a great time with you today. I mean, I think you got a remarkable story. I think you're doing amazing things. You're exemplary of when I talk about people who better the pond. And I sincerely thank you for doing everything that you're doing. And I think that we're gonna have a great relationship. And we're definitely going to keep in touch. I think we're very like-minded. So, yeah. So thank you again, Edward. I really appreciate it. This is Warren Berry, and if you want to reach out to me, it's warren@instinctivesolutions.ca. And officially, we went to, today. We did go across the pond. So we're going to take you beyond the pond to better the pond, because we're better together. Thank you, Edward.
Thank you very much, Warren.